You're here because so many people clearly aren't feeling included right now. We're seeing the momentum behind the Black Lives Matter movement. Now it is immigrants with some of the actions that the president has taken to stop immigrant workers from working in this country. And we've seen so many companies come out with messages of support, new commitments to the Black community, to immigrants. Do you think this is a moment where we can make real change? We will make real change? Or once this passes, will things drift back to the way they always were?
I hope they don't drift back. I feel like we've seen so much now, right? We've seen what systemic racism looks like, and it's been proven again and again and again in this very short period of time, and you can't unsee it. So my hope is, now that we've seen something, they say, see something, say something. We've seen it, we've said it, and now it's time to do something. And I do feel like the generation coming up into the workforce now is much more activist. They're much more aware of how systemic racism and discrimination works, and they're much more willing to speak up and to act. So they're willing to confront their employers. You see the workers at Google and Facebook and Amazon pushing their employers to change bad policies, and you see them also willing to boycott and to use their spending dollars to impact change.
Meantime, you've got so many workforces sheltering in place in the middle of a pandemic, and you've been examining online harassment in the midst of the quarantine specifically. And I'm so curious what trends you're seeing. How does sexism, how does racism surface in a remote situation?
Yeah, we're just starting the research, so we don't have more than anecdotal evidence, but we are hearing from companies that they're seeing more interactions on Slack and Zoom that are, that they don't want to see, that there's racism and that there's sexism. And and if you think about it, it makes sense. Like all of a sudden, my personal and professional boundaries are bleeding together. I'm working from the same place in my house, and I don't have as many boundaries. So the behavior that I'm, using for my social media presence, it's the same type of behavior I'm bringing into my online workplace platforms. And so we're, concerned. Caroline Cinders and I are working on this together. We're concerned that there will be, the same problems that we see with all of these social media platforms, all of a sudden coming over to these workplace platforms. And we'd love to get more information, and we're working on pulling together information on like what do those forms of harassment look like? What can companies do to make sure their employees are safe and that their other employees know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable? And then what can platforms do to provide better, better experiences for employees who are using them?
Meantime, you've also taken a close look at online harassment on social media, and I know you've experienced it yourself. We're in the middle of a massive ad boycott of Facebook over how Facebook does or does not moderate hate on its platforms. How do you think Mark Zuckerberg is responding to this?
It's, it's more of the same, I feel like. And it's not just Mark, it's all of the social media platforms. They've come out to, say that they support Black Lives Matter to them. But then when you look at what happens on their platforms, it's a mess. And, once they get called out, they'll make a few changes, but it's often the minimal. And then they want to look fair. So they're trying to figure out some way of doing it that ends up being very ineffective. This requires a lot of change. It requires a new team of people doing the work, because clearly the people who have been doing it in the past are not doing a good job, and it doesn't seem clear that they want to or can do a good job. So let's get better people in there. Let's figure out how you put metrics to it to see if you're being effective, to see if the measures that you're taking are working. And then let's also have more people who are directly impacted by the harassment on your site making decisions. So instead of having this team that is very homogenous, let's make sure there are some Black and brown men, women, and non-binary people actually in the room, actually having an ability to help guide the changes and make sure that they're working and improve the products.
Meantime, you served as CEO of Reddit for a time. Reddit has now banned the biggest pro-Trump community on Reddit. Of course, these are some of the things that you were fighting for a long time, but we also saw co-founder Alexis Ohanian resign from the board and demand that he be replaced with a black director. Michael Siebel of Y Combinator has now replaced him. What do you think of Alexis's resignation?
I mean, I think Reddit has a long way to go, and it's about doing the work. It's about making better decisions. It's about getting people to actually care about these changes. It's the same problem that we're seeing at Facebook, the same problem we see at all these other platforms. Like, there is no accountability for all the bad decisions that got us here. How do we understand how the changes are going to be made going forward to completely turn these platforms around? I don't see a path when the boards don't push and when the leaders don't care of change, right? I see incremental changes that are that seem more PR oriented. I think it's great that advertisers are now getting involved, because that's just yet another pressure point on these platforms. But again, like, one person changing isn't going to make a difference. It's really, you have to change in a way that's like much deeper than that, right? I'll believe it when I see it. Right now, they've done some work, but you can see there's still so much more work to do, and it's not easy, and it's not something that is something that's fun, right? It's work, and it's hard, and it takes time, and some of your users aren't going to be happy with anything that you do, and you just need to like have a guiding principle that you can follow and point to, and that people know where you're going, and if they don't like it, they can get off and go someplace else.
Meantime, Ellen, talking about new commitments, as we've been talking, Salesforce has said it will double its number of black leaders by 2023 and double its representation of black workers in the United States by 50%. What do you think of commitments like that?
I think it's great to set targets, right? Like, we've seen that trying to do it without targets doesn't work. And if I have targets, then I can see how I'm doing against them. I can see if I'm making progress. And then all of a sudden, I can also start finding out where the trouble spots are. Like, where are the areas that I'm not being able to succeed? Like, is it on my engineering team? Is it with a specific engineering manager? Is it with a specific function and vice president? Like, where are there trouble spots where I'm not able to succeed? I hope that they're looking more broadly, and that they're thinking about black men, black women, and black non-binary people, right? Because otherwise you end up solving only a piece of the problem, and you're still not solving the bigger problem. But I think it's a great step. I think it's something that I wish more companies would do. Set targets for all your groups. Make sure that you're also improving your whole hiring process and getting out to broader networks of people, not just in the black community, but also in the Latinx community, the indigenous community. Like, if you can improve your whole hiring process and make it fair, you will get more people from all of these groups to be in your company. And it doesn't require focusing on just one area. You can do more than just one area at a time.
So speaking of that, there's been some interesting conversation about how the Black Lives Matter movement is being felt by the Asian American community. Obviously, Asian Americans are a minority themselves, have our own complicated story and issue around race, and sometimes feel they have to be silent about their struggles. Other Asian Americans have been coming forward and talking about how they feel their own parents have been racist. I'm curious how you're dissecting this.
Yeah, it's hard as an Asian American to always feel very clear on emotions, right? We've had a much easier time in tech. You see the numbers are much stronger for Asian Americans in these tech companies, except until you hit the bamboo ceiling and you reach a point where people don't see Asians or Asian Americans as leaders. They don't see them in management roles. They don't see them running companies. So that there's the model minority myth, and then there's the bamboo ceiling, and there are all of these things that are components of white supremacy that often we buy into, like the world is a meritocracy. If you study hard, if you work hard, everything will come your way. And then we realize it doesn't work for us, and then we see it's actually working even worse for Black people, for Latinx people. And how do we work together with these groups to really help support them and to help change our tech industry and change all of these different areas where systemic racism has been such a huge problem. We see, though, that there's a lot of pressure to get Asian Americans, to side against other groups. It's there, there's anti-Blackness in the Asian American community, which doesn't help. So how do we really try to take action? And Michelle Kim and I are working together to outline, like, what are the steps that you should take as an Asian American to learn about how Black activists have helped change law and helped change the United States culture in ways that have really helped Asians and Asian Americans, and how do we learn about our history and learn about our own anti-Blackness in a way that allows us to be great advocates for everyone, and understand that until we make things better for everyone, we're not really helping ourselves as much as we could be.